There is a particular kind of silence that follows a mountain disaster. Not the silence of peace or rest, but the silence of absence, of people who were there and then were not, of ropes that held and then didn't, of weather that was clear and then wasn't. Outdoor adventure has always carried risk. The mountains don't negotiate. The snow doesn't wait. And sometimes, despite experience, despite preparation, despite every reasonable precaution a person can take, the outcome is catastrophic and irreversible. The cases here span 4 decades and 4 continents. They involve novice climbers and seasoned professionals, commercial expeditions and solo adventurers. Some deaths came without warning, in seconds. Others unfolded over hours, with survivors watching helplessly from nearby camps. Here are 5 of the worst deaths in the history of outdoor adventures. Mount Rainier, 1981. It was the morning of June 21, 1981, a Sunday. The sky over Mount Rainier in Washington state was still dark when a group of climbers began moving upward through the cold. They were novices mostly, 23 people in total, led by 6 professional guides from Rainier Mountaineering Inc. They had spent the previous day completing a basic climbing skills course and slept the night at Camp Muir, roughly 10,000 feet above sea level. Now they were pushing for the summit, a goal that typically takes 5 to 8 hours from that elevation. The route took them across the Cowlitz Glacier, through Cathedral Rocks Gap, and onto Ingraham Flats, a broad snowfield sitting below Disappointment Cleaver at around 11,200 feet. 3 climbers had already turned back before they got there. They didn't have the stamina to continue, they said. Guide Christopher Lynch led them down. The remaining 20 rested on Ingraham Flats, with guides Ronald Wilson and Thomas O'Brien, while 3 other guides climbed higher. John Day, Michael Targett, and Peter Whitaker had gone up to check snow conditions on the Emmons Glacier. What they found concerned them. Nearly 2 feet of fresh snow had fallen overnight. Unpredictable, unstable. Senior guide John Day made the call. The climb was over. They would turn the group back. The 3 guides were already heading down toward Ingraham Flats when the mountain made its own decision. Shortly before 6 a.m., without any warning at all, the Ingraham Glacier icefall fractured. From their position on Disappointment Cleaver, Day, Targett, and Whitaker heard the crack first, then saw it. A wall of ice 300 feet wide broke free and fell 800 feet before shattering against the mountainside. The force of impact sent a wave of ice and snow hurtling down Ingraham Flats directly toward the resting climbers below. The group heard it coming. Roped together in clusters of 5, they scrambled to move. It wasn't enough. The avalanche reached them in seconds. When the snow settled, 11 people emerged from the debris. 11 others did not. Among the dead was guide Tom O'Brien, 19 years old. The surviving guide searched through the rubble and found almost nothing. A section of rope, a ski cap, a pair of goggles, a headlamp near the edge of a deep crevasse. It appeared the missing climbers had been swept into the crevasse and buried under tons of glacial ice. Senior guide John Day radioed the National Park Service at 6:10 a.m. Weather moved in quickly after that. Wind and snow turned the site into a whiteout by mid-morning. Rescue teams reached Camp Muir that evening but couldn't push any higher. The next afternoon, a brief break in the weather allowed them to reach the avalanche site. They found only large blocks of ice under fresh snow. They dug trenches and probed the rubble for nearly 3 hours before the snow closed in again and forced them back down. On June 23, 1981, the search was called off. The bodies could not be reached. A formal board of inquiry convened weeks later and concluded that the icefall was a random, glacial event, unpredictable and unpreventable. The guides were held blameless. The board found they had led the group along the safest, most heavily traveled route to the summit and had paused to rest in what was considered a protected area. The 11 victims were never recovered. Their remains are still there, sealed beneath the glacier on the slopes of Mount Rainier, entombed in ice as the mountain continues its slow, indifferent movement. A memorial was established at Paradise Visitors Center on the first anniversary of the disaster, built around a photograph recovered from a camera found in the rubble, and a brass plaque listing the names of those who didn't come down. As of 2014, the event remained the deadliest mountaineering accident in American history. The mountain kept what the avalanche buried, and nothing since has changed that. It was May 10, 1996, and the upper slopes of Mount Everest were crowded. 3 commercial expeditions had planned to summit on the same day via the South Col approach. Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants team, Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness team, a Taiwanese expedition led by Makalu Gao. Altogether, 34 climbers pushed upward from Camp 4 at around midnight, moving through darkness toward the highest point on Earth. Both Hall and Fisher had set turnaround times. If their clients hadn't summited by a certain hour, they would descend regardless. The reasoning was straightforward. Each climber carried enough bottled oxygen for a single attempt without delays. Falling behind schedule meant running out of oxygen on the descent, and at 29,000 feet, that was its own death sentence. The delays began almost immediately. The climbing Sherpas and guides had not pre-installed fixed ropes on several of the most technical sections, so teams had to stop and place ropes as they moved. At the Hillary Step, climbers waited an hour while guides worked. Progress slowed to match the least experienced members. The turnaround times slipped, and nobody turned back. By the time some climbers reached the summit, it was mid-afternoon. Fisher didn't top out until 3:45 p.m. Others arrived even later. They were already behind schedule, already exhausted, already burning through their oxygen reserves faster than planned. Then the storm came. A blizzard swept across the mountain in the late afternoon. Within hours, the South Col was a whiteout. Winds reached over 100 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Climbers who had been moving steadily now couldn't locate Camp 4, which sat only a few hundred feet away. Some wandered in circles. Some sat down in the snow because they could no longer stay on their feet. Guide Andy Harris climbed back up toward Hall and client Doug Hansen, who were stranded near the south summit. Hansen collapsed and was gone not long after. Harris disappeared into the storm and was never seen again. Hall, frostbitten and out of oxygen, spent the night exposed on the mountain. In the early hours of May 11, 1996, he radioed base camp and asked them to patch him through by satellite phone to his wife, Jan Arnold, who was pregnant with their first child. They spoke for a time. He told her to sleep well and not to worry too much. Those were among his last words. By the following day, he was gone. Fisher, already showing signs of serious altitude sickness during the ascent, became stranded below the south summit. His head Sherpa, Lopsang Jangbu, eventually descended at Fisher's own instruction. Anatoly Bukriv, the Mountain Madness guide who had come down ahead of the clients, made 3 solo trips back into the storm from Camp 4 and pulled 3 climbers to safety. Fisher was not among them. His body was found the following evening, frozen where he had stopped moving. Yasuko Namba, a client on Hall's team, was found alive but unresponsive in the snow on May 11th. A rescue was judged impossible. She was gone before morning. Beck Weathers, left for dead twice in the same storm, eventually walked back into camp under his own power, nearly blind, suffering severe hypothermia. He survived, but lost his right hand, most of his left hand, and his nose to frostbite. 8 climbers were gone when the storm passed. Hall, Hansen, Harris, Fisher, and Namba on the South Col approach, along with 3 members of an Indo-Tibetan border police expedition on the northeast ridge. The disaster became one of the most documented events in mountaineering history, examined in books, films, and inquiries for decades afterward. John Krakauer's account, published in 1997, brought the story to millions of readers and raised difficult questions about the commercialization of Everest, questions about whether guiding inexperienced clients to the summit of the world's highest mountain could ever be made genuinely safe. Those questions were never fully answered. In the years that followed, the mountain kept accepting clients, and the deaths kept coming. Kutulandasit. It was August 1st, 2008, on the upper slopes of K2, the second highest mountain on Earth, somewhere above 8,000 meters on the Pakistan-China border. Nearly 30 climbers from 10 different expeditions had assembled there, all of them aiming for a summit that relatively few people in history have ever stood on. K2 rises to 8,611 meters, and mountaineers have long considered it far more unforgiving than Everest. The terrain is steeper, the weather less predictable, the margins for error smaller. What happened over the next 2 days would become the worst single disaster in K2's recorded history. The trouble had started before the climbers even left Camp 4. 2 of the most experienced high-altitude porters responsible for fixing ropes through the mountain's most dangerous passage, a steep, narrow couloir called the Bottleneck, had fallen ill at a lower camp and turned back. They left behind nearly half the rope that had been set aside for the summit push, and no one above them knew. When the advance team reached the Bottleneck and the lines ran out midway through, the entire column had to stop. Ropes were cut from lower sections, coiled, and passed upward. Hours were lost while climbers waited in the cold, exposed below a field of hanging seracs that could break loose without warning. Most teams eventually pushed through and continued upward. By the time the last climbers reached the summit, it was close to 8 p.m., hours outside any safe window for descent. 2 men had already been lost before any of them reached the top. Dren Mandic, a Serbian climber, had unclipped from the fixed rope during the ascent to deal with his equipment and lost his footing. He fell more than 100 meters down the Bottleneck. Those watching from below saw him sit up and wave, and for a short time believed he might be alive. When a recovery team reached him, he was gone. While the group attempted to lower his body, a Pakistani porter named Jahan Baig lost his footing on the same slope and fell to his death before anyone could stop it. The survivors who summited began their descent into darkness. At around 8:30 p.m., as Norwegian climbers Cecilia Skog and Lars Nessa were moving through the traverse below the Bottleneck, a serac broke free from above. The falling ice tore through all the fixed lines and struck Rolf Bay, Skog's husband, who had stopped his own summit bid about 100 meters below the top and was waiting on the traverse for his wife to come down. He was swept away before anyone could reach him. Skog and Nessa managed to descend without fixed ropes and reached Camp 4 during the night. Bay was gone. Above the Bottleneck, the situation was becoming desperate for those still up there. With the lines destroyed, the descent through the most technical section of the route had to be made without ropes, in darkness, at altitude. Some climbers tried to move in the dark. Others stopped and waited for morning, spending an unplanned night in the open above 8,000 meters. French climber Hugues Dobered, who had run out of bottled oxygen hours earlier, fell from the traverse during the night. His Pakistani porter, Meherban Karim, was never seen again. When morning came on August 2nd, 3 Korean climbers, Park Kyung-hyo, Kim Hyo-gying, and Hwang Dong-jin, were found hanging tangled in ropes near the top of the traverse. Irish climber Gerard McDonnell and Italian Marco Confortola worked for hours trying to free them. The Koreans were eventually freed. Then another serac came down. It swept away McDonnell, all 3 Koreans, and their Sherpa Jumik Bote. A rescue Sherpa, Pasang Bote, who had climbed up from Camp 4 that morning to help, was taken by the same collapse. The final count reached 11. They had come from 7 different countries. What killed them was not a single catastrophe, but a chain of separate incidents across 2 days, each one made more likely by the one before it, beginning with 2 sick porters and a coil of rope left behind at a lower camp. Annapurna, 2014. It was October 14, 2014, peak trekking season in Nepal. The Annapurna Circuit, one of the most traveled long-distance trekking routes in the world, was full of visitors from dozens of countries moving through mountain passes they had saved money and years to reach. October is when people go. The monsoon has typically cleared by then, the skies open up, and the views across the Himalayas reward every difficult step. Thorong La Pass, the highest point on the circuit at 5,416 meters, sees its heaviest traffic in October. In 2013, nearly 20,000 foreign trekkers crossed the pass that month alone. People plan around it. They time their trips around it. October, on paper, is the safe choice. On the morning of October 14, 2014, heavy snowfall began near Thorong La at around 8 a.m. Within a short time, visibility dropped to almost nothing. The snow came so fast and so thick that the trail disappeared beneath it almost as soon as it fell. Trekkers who had left their camps before dawn to make the crossing, some setting out as early as 4 a.m., found themselves moving through a whiteout with no visible route, no shelter ahead, and no way to know how much worse it was going to get. The storm had its origins far to the south. Cyclone Hudhud had made landfall on India's eastern coast days earlier, and as the system moved inland and pushed north, its moisture collided with the high terrain of the Himalayas. What came down on the pass that morning was, according to experts interviewed afterward, the worst snowfall in a decade for that region. In some places, close to 1.8 meters of snow fell within 12 hours. The people caught on the pass were not equipped for it. Many were trekking independently, without guides. Some had been given no warning at all, because there was no system in place to warn trekkers already on the mountain about rapidly changing conditions. As the storm intensified, cell phone service failed across the Manang district. Electricity cut out. Internet connections dropped. The entire area went silent to the outside world. People fell into ravines concealed under fresh snow. Others lost the trail completely when the path markers disappeared. Some sat down in the snow to rest and couldn't stand back up. The cold was severe, and the snow didn't stop. Alongside the foreign visitors, local guides, cooks, and yak herders who worked the route every season were caught in the same conditions. The mountain did not distinguish between the experienced and the inexperienced, the visitor and the resident. Rescue operations began on October 15th. Helicopters went up when the weather broke long enough to fly. Nepal Army teams worked upward from below, making their way toward the pass through terrain already buried in fresh accumulation. 21 trekkers and guides were pulled from the area that first day. The search continued for days, rescuers digging through snow while fresh avalanche risk built around them. When the official rescue effort ended on October 19, 2014, at least 43 people were confirmed dead. Among them were 21 foreign trekkers from multiple countries, along with Nepali guides, cooks, and yak herders who had worked these routes for years. An estimated 50 people remained missing. Another 175 had been injured, many with severe frostbite. In total, 407 people were brought out alive over the course of the operation. In the aftermath, local authorities were criticized for the absence of any warning system capable of reaching people already moving through the high passes. Nepal's prime minister called the loss of life extremely tragic, at a time when worldwide weather updates are available every second. The government acknowledged that more emergency shelters, better weather tracking, and improved communication were needed. New regulations were proposed, including a trekker registry and mandatory use of trained local guides. Some of those changes were put in place, but 43 people were already gone, caught on a pass they had traveled to in the safest month of the year, in weather that no one told them was coming. The Annapurna disaster remains Nepal's worst trekking catastrophe on record. Tunnel Creek, 2012. It was February 19, 2012, a Sunday morning near Stevens Pass in Washington State. A group of roughly 16 people had hiked up to a ridgeline above the ski area boundary and were preparing to drop into a steep, wooded backcountry run called Tunnel Creek. These were not people new to mountains. The group included professional skiers, ski patrol veterans, avalanche safety instructors, and ski industry figures who had built careers around snow. Several held formal avalanche certifications. They had looked at the conditions, talked through the terrain, and made a collective decision to proceed. The snowpack that winter had a problem buried inside it. A weak layer had formed deep in the snow weeks earlier, and newer snow had piled on top of it since then. Avalanche forecasters had been tracking that layer across the region. The danger rating that morning was listed as considerable for certain elevation bands. The group knew the rating existed. Some of them were the kind of people who helped produce those ratings for others. The avalanche released from high on the slope, triggered by the weight of the skiers moving across it. It was a large slide, and it moved fast through the trees. Some in the group managed to angle out to the sides and clear the debris field. Others were taken into it and carried hundreds of meters downhill through timber and over terrain breaks before the snow stopped. 3 people were gone. Jim Jack, a prominent free-skiing competitor and longtime figure in the ski industry. Ronnie Castillo, a ski patroller. Johnny Brennan, a ski instructor. All 3 had the kind of experience that most people in the mountains will never accumulate. All 3 had looked at the same slope that morning and made the same call as the people who survived. Elise Saugstad, a professional skier, was carried deep into the debris, but survived because she deployed an avalanche airbag backpack, a device that keeps a person closer to the surface during a slide. She was fortunate. The margin between her outcome and theirs was a piece of equipment, and the physics of where the snow carried each of them. The New York Times published a long investigation of the disaster in December 2012, written by reporter John Branch. The piece, titled Snowfall, the Avalanche at Tunnel Creek, won the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing in 2013. It traced the decisions the group made that morning in careful detail, showing how experienced people moving in a group can step gradually toward risk, each decision feeling reasonable against the last, until the accumulated weight of those choices becomes something that can't be undone. These 5 events happened across 4 decades, on 4 different continents, to people with very different levels of experience and preparation. What none of them shared was any warning of how the day would end. The mountains have never been indifferent to who deserves to return. They have simply been indifferent. The snow doesn't weigh a person's experience before it moves. The ice doesn't check whether a climber is professional or novice before it breaks free. What these cases share is not recklessness or ignorance. Most of the people here understood the risks they were taking. Some of them had spent their entire working lives learning to manage those risks. It wasn't enough, and for reasons that no amount of preparation could have fully addressed. That is the part that stays with you. Days.